Well, hi, this is Pastor Dwayne, back again with SCBC Stories, and I'm here today with Dave and Michelle Keck from Sussex County Bible Church. Many of you who are longtime SCBC folks know the Kecks pretty well. I feel like I've known them just about my whole life, even though it's probably only been about 12, 13 years, something like that. But Dave and Michelle, I'm glad you guys were willing to do this and to share your stories, and I know that many people will be blessed as they hear that. I know my family's been blessed to know you guys and to serve alongside of you at the church, and along with Andrew and Ellie, your kids. And so this is an exciting opportunity for us to hear from you, and for those that don't know you, maybe to get to know you a little better. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start out kind of thinking about your background. So where did you guys grow up? Kind of what was your background like, through your childhood and youth? To share a little bit about that with us.
Well, I grew up upstate in Newcastle, and with my parents, Marty and Jackie, they go to our church. And I grew up going to the Catholic church. So that was my background as far as faith goes. And I stayed in the Catholic church through college, really. And then when David and I got married, that's when we started looking for a church together. And that's when we chose a church that would be a compromise, I guess, for us both. Okay. I didn't know, I wasn't a Christian growing up. I didn't become a Christian until my later 20s. I always believed in God. I thought I was a good person, but I didn't understand faith in Jesus Christ for salvation. I didn't understand that.
Okay. How about you, Dave?
Yeah, I grew up right on Savannah Road in Lewis. So I was like a downtown Lewis kid. And I went to church at Bethel United Methodist Church on 4th Street in Lewis. And I attended there pretty much, I think, almost till I went to college. Got a little thin in my high school years, but tried to attend, or I would say sometimes was made to attend. Definitely, looking back at it, I would have thought I was a Christian, but I definitely wasn't a Christian. There was nothing evident really in my life that would have led people to believe that, other than my attendance in church. So that was kind of how I grew up. I was actually baptized a Lutheran. My parents were Lutheran. They were both from the Lehigh Valley area up in Pennsylvania and had moved down here. So I was born down here, but they gave up their Lutheran roots because I think at the time there weren't many Lutheran churches in the area. And they started attending the Methodist church. And so that's how I became associated with being a Methodist in the beginning.
Okay. So you went to Cape, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. Cape and Lipton High School. Yeah.
Michelle, you came down in high school, right? So
That's right.
Cape. Okay.
I moved here when I was 16.
Okay.
And I graduated. I went my senior year at Cape.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you guys both went to college, or?
Yep. Yeah. So we met. I'd already been accepted to go to school at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And Michelle and I both played tennis. She was on the girls' tennis team, and I was on the men's tennis team at Cape. And we met there basically playing tennis. And so I started dating her probably just maybe about a month before I went away to go, well, before I graduated, I should say. So we dated that whole summer and dated all through college then. I went to Muhlenberg, Michelle went to University of Delaware, and we kept a relationship through that whole time period. And I even went to work for Marty, Marty Moody, which everybody knows. And I built houses with him during the summers as Michelle and I were dating.
Okay. So he had a good chance to check out his potential son-in-law on the
job.
Yeah.
He wasn't easy on me. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that's great. So you guys then met in high school. So technically kind of high school sweethearts. And,
Yep.
and so what year would that have been roughly?
87, 1987.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
And then I graduated 88. I'm a year younger than David, so I graduated a year later. I was still in high school when he was away at college. Mm-hmm.
What did you guys study in college? What were your kind of fields of study?
Go ahead, Shane.
I went to school for communications, public relations, and then I worked in DC for a little bit when we were first married and after I had graduated. But then I realized that I just saw so many of these women that were dropping their kids off at daycare at like 6 o'clock in the morning and picking them up at 7. And I thought, I don't want that for my family. I didn't think it was going to ultimately be a good fit. So I went back to school and got teaching credits. And so I have 30 teaching credits. I don't actually have a certification because I was teaching in a private school, and that was in lieu of teacher certification in Maryland. But then I got pregnant with Andrew and ended up staying home.
Okay.
So that's kind of how that went.
I had a degree in biology from Muhlenberg, and I wanted to be an ornithology professor. I actually wanted to teach people about birds. That was my desire. And I was trying to get into a graduate program anywhere that would pay for me to get my PhD in ornithology. And while I was doing that, I was working for the state of Delaware as a field biologist, doing their natural species program stuff and, doing work with birds and all that kind of stuff throughout the state. And I only did that for about a year and a half, and was also working on some fishing boats as a mate, and had actually gotten an invitation to go to work on a really big fishing boat out of Palm Beach. And the same week, got a call from my dad's boss, who was working for Fisher Scientific Company, which is now Thermo Fisher Scientific Company, and asked me if I wanted to be a sales rep. And also asked Michelle to marry me. It was all within that same few weeks. Wow. And so I had a real big decision to make. It was like, they say a fork in the road. Well, I had a lot of forks in the road to make a decision. And I knew I had kind of gotten accepted at University of Arkansas to study quail. And I thought, well, that would be pretty neat. And the boat job would be pretty neat. But the money was in being a sales rep. And I thought that would probably be more responsible than making Michelle move to Arkansas with me. Or never seeing me being on a fishing boat, because I knew how that lifestyle was probably going to be. But you look back at those things and you kind of can see when you're a Christian, and then you look back at things, you can kind of see that the Lord was moving you maybe in directions that you kind of didn't want to go, because he was shaping your future to bring you to him, and that's kind of one of those points in time in my life where I probably didn't do the two things I really wanted to do and did something else because I think God was pushing me that direction. It wasn't because of the money or anything. But I ended up working for Fisher Scientific had a great career actually with them for 7 or 8 years. And then worked my way into management with them. And then that's when I think the Lord really started touching our lives. But I'm sure you're probably going to ask me about that next, so I won't.
Yeah.
I don't want to jump ahead too far.
That's a good segue into how you guys became Christians. How did you go from, I guess, nominally religious, right, and living your lives, kind of pursuing the potential American dream, to realizing your relationship with God was not what you thought it was? How did God get you to that place?
Well, we were living in a little apartment complex right off of I-95 over in Maryland. And that was right after Michelle had stopped working for the Burstyn Marsteller or something. Isn't that what it was called? Down in Washington, D.C. And like she said, she had come back and was starting to take classes at Towson University. And I was working as a sales rep then, I'd get up in the morning and we'd drive around and I'd go see clients and then come home in the evening, and it was just the two of us. The kids weren't born yet. And so we were in Columbia, Maryland there. And I remember a guy, and I remember his name, was Bruce Hopler. He was traveling Baptist preacher, you know. So this guy was banging on our door at the apartment complex. And you got to understand that during this time frame, that was right when carjacking became all the rage in Baltimore. You know, people were, you know, getting killed, beat up, you know, and everything. And so we're looking at this guy standing outside our door through the peephole, and he looked pretty innocent. And he said, "I'd like to come in and talk to you about God and, you know, what I'm trying to do and building a church." And you know, we basically laughed and said, "No, you can talk to us through the through the door." So we didn't. I don't even think we let him in that first time, but got his name or number or something.
He came back.
He came back. Yeah, he came back, and we ended up actually becoming friends with he and his wife, and they started inviting us to services, which were all over the place. You know, they'd have them in somebody's apartment, and it started just like a Bible study, kind of how you started, Dwayne. And it still wasn't clicking with us. Obviously, it wasn't. We hadn't become Christians at that point. We were just intrigued, I guess, and were probably more taken in by the character of the people that we were with than God himself, you know. But, you know, that's part of it, right? You know, how we act, you know, can draw people in. And, you know, so we would go to all kinds of stuff. Will you tell them some of the things we did? Because some of them were kind of funny.
Well, our perception of them was like they were kind of holy rollers, and he'd leave us after talking about, you know, salvation and Jesus Christ and baptism, and he'd leave and we'd be like, what was that all about? You know, we just thought it was a bit much, but we kept going. That was the first time we had seen immersion baptism in a pool. And there was like a picnic after, and we were like, what are we doing? This is just weird. Yeah. And but
I even remember we went to, like, they had gotten bigger, and they had rented a school out, and they had a band, and we thought that was the craziest thing, because, you know, we grew up with choir and organ, and we're like, this is just too much. You know, we couldn't believe there was a guitar and drums and all that kind of stuff. We thought it was just way over the top. But that was our first, I would say that was probably when the Lord really started reaching out to us. And then we had to move away from there. So we moved away from there because of my job back to the Eastern Shore, and we went to live in Denton. And we kind of lost track of Bruce and Terry through all that change. And but we still wanted to go to church, and we ended up going to a Lutheran church in Easton. And I can't remember that pastor's name. Do you remember that pastor's name?
Groton, is it Kevin?
Yeah, we can't remember, but
we were there
we were there a short time. But it was there, I think, for me specifically, that it was kind of those things where you were listening to the sermon, and it felt like nobody was paying attention around you to him except for yourself. It was almost like he was speaking directly to me and not the rest of the congregation with some of his sermons. And I thought that it seemed almost too supernatural or weird that it was like touching me like that. And I think that's when things started to really start to change for me. And I remember in the course of all this, I'd gotten into management with my company. And I was gone all the time. I was like barely home on the weekends even, and flying around, driving around. I remember, I think I put 50,000 miles on my car in 1 year. And I remember being told at one point, I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, and my boss called me and told me I was going to have to fire somebody that didn't deserve to be fired. And I remember calling Michelle and just thinking, I was thinking back to the sermons, you know, and I was just thinking, this isn't right. There's something not right about all this. And I just told her, I said, I think I'm quitting. This just isn't what I thought it was going to be. This isn't for me. And I feel like we're supposed to do something else. And it was a devastating time, because I had made it to a point where I thought I was probably going to continue on and be really something with that company. You know, in worldly aspects, I would have been crazy to leave, but I really felt like that was the first time where I admitted to myself that God was actually moving me to do something. I still didn't, I still haven't been saved. I didn't understand that whole thing. I didn't understand all that, but I did understand that I was being pushed in a direction that I didn't want to go.
You were also talking with the pastor
and the
during Bible
pastor
study, and that was when that started.
Yeah, and the pastor, we consulted with the pastor, and my grandfather, who was the one that kind of pushed me along in Fisher and had been a big executive with them, I thought, man, I might achieve what he had achieved at the same company. And I thought I was going to tell him I was quitting, and I thought he's not going to like that. And he said, oh no, you need to do what you think is right. And what, so my grandfather was even giving me godly advice, I would say, and that, I shouldn't. And the funny thing was, and I don't want to badmouth the poor pastor, but the pastor was like, you can't quit. You got to know what you're doing first and be responsible. But I really felt like, no, just quit. You'll be fine. And that's what I did. I told my boss, I'm quitting, and I don't know what I'm going to do yet. And he actually echoed some of the same sentiment that I was feeling, that he didn't feel comfortable in his job either. And he was the one that kept promoting me as he got promoted. And he felt like he was working too hard. And that's a whole nother story, but that's an interesting one too, if anybody wants to talk to me about that. But, he was very kind and said, look, until you get another job, why don't you keep working with us and train your replacement, and then you can stick around and have something to do. And I was like, that's great. And that's when Michelle and I immediately moved we sold our home in Denton and moved back to the beach, to Rehoboth, because we just thought there makes no sense for us to be anywhere but where we really want to be. And that was back at home. And knowing that this wasn't of us and that God was kind of directing it, we thought we better start to find a church. And we immediately ended up back at Bethel Methodist United Church, because that's what seemed familiar to us, I guess, is what was the easiest thing to do.
And your family was there.
And my family was there. And and we had been married there. So it kind of, and Andrew and Ellie were along by this time too. It wasn't long that we were there that we didn't feel comfortable there, that it just felt empty to us, at least. And so we ended up going to Presbyterian church under Grottos, and I can't remember, not under Grottos, under Casapoulas. Mm-hmm.
But we were invited to a friend of mine asked me to go to a Bible study. So I started attending a women's Bible study there. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I was really starting to grow in my faith and have understanding. And she invited us to her son's baptism. And I asked David, would he come too? Because you hadn't been there at that point. Mm-hmm. And so we went to that, and he gave the message of salvation at the baptism. And it just, we had talked about it afterwards, and like, this feels like a better fit for, it's not like we were looking for a church to help us grow in our faith, because we didn't really understand that at that point, but it just was, this seems like more of what we're looking for, mm-hmm. I guess. Mm-hmm. And then that's where you got saved through that ministry there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The preacher was preaching expositionally, mm-hmm. Pastor Jamie was preaching mm-hmm. expositionally, and that really rang with me. Mm-hmm. And we just started to understand the word and what it was drawing us to do. And, we were actually going to Bible study with Jen Lester's dad. Mm-hmm. Was kind of leading a Bible study. Mike Cunningham was leading a Bible study, and I ended up, there were some tracts at the Bible study, and I took one home one night, and I was like, man, this is it. And I remember praying in the bathroom by myself, Lord, save me. I understood at that moment, it was that time. And it's kind of funny, because you think from the time that we met Bruce and Terry in our apartment in it was years, so that was probably 3 years that, the Lord was kind of pushing us in that direction.
It was more than that.
Was it more
than that? We lived in
that?
Denton for 5 years, and we lived
Oh
in
yeah, what
Columbia
am I
for 1
thinking?
year.
So that it was probably 6 years
Mm-hmm.
that we worked through things, and that,
Mm-hmm.
to me, I guess I look back at that and you think, you don't give up on people. You don't give up on people, because you don't know how long it's gonna take, or I should say, more important, when the Lord's gonna decide that they're ready, to hear it. So, and it's our job to keep pushing. And there was a number of people that were pushing, that was 3 different pastors, numerous other Christians that were in Bible studies with us that kept pushing along the way. And finally, I just had the sense to listen to the Lord, So, yeah.
Michelle, what was that like for you? Had you already accepted Christ by this time?
For me, it wasn't like David had a moment in time that he actually remembers. I don't have that. Mine was more like a wooing kind of, I was understanding more things. It was like he was peeling the scales off my eyes. And then, I don't remember the exact moment that I had a salvation moment, but I did have understanding, and my faith just kept growing and getting stronger. So,
and I can say that's for certain that she was before me, because, things that we used to argue about, Michelle she had become very big on working on herself and not worrying so much about me. She knew she had to be the person that God wanted her to be. And that improved our relationship vastly. And that's, I guess, and I know when you counsel people, that's probably the first thing that you address is, where are you at personally? Because if you've got problems between you, it's probably not the other person's fault. It's probably your issues with God. So, that's something that became immediately noticeable to me, is that what's changed in my wife? Why are we not arguing or bickering about things that we used to have issues about, and now all of a sudden there was nothing. Yeah. And that even pushed me even harder, because if I want to be that way, that she was being. So
yeah, it's like 1 Corinthians 7 when Paul, encourages the wife to remain with the unbelieving husband for that reason.
Right.
God might work through her to win her husband, and it's a great testimony to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, for me, God was showing me that David is a gift from God to me, and that we're on the same team in our relationship. And instead of fighting, I wanted to be a peacemaker. And I learned that it's more important in your relationship to be a peacemaker than to be right. You know what I mean? Like to always have to be right. And I found that when have met with different ladies that have had some issues with husbands, and they're always waiting for the husband to do something different. But he, and I'm like, no, it's you. You have to give an account before God. It doesn't matter what your husband's doing. You have to glorify the Lord in the role that he's given you. It's a privilege to be a wife and a mother. And so it's not about you. It's how are you representing the Lord in that relationship, in your marriage. And so, and how can I be a blessing to David instead of tearing him down or making things difficult? He's representing our family. He's our leader. So I want to make his job easier for him instead of having it be a struggle. And so for me, like the time that he's talking about, I just realized that it doesn't matter what David's doing. I mean, it matters. It'd be nice if things were different at that point. But they may never be. And I still have to be faithful and do what God's calling me to do in my circumstances, no matter how I feel, because our emotions deceive us. So what's the truth? And the truth is that gave me the privilege of being a wife, and I need to represent him in my marriage the best that I could, and be loving and kind and peaceful and, gentle and sacrificing my needs for the betterment of our marriage. Because when both people are doing that, it's wonderful,
Yeah.
So, and I think that's why for our marriage, we have a very peaceful marriage. It's very peaceful, and, we're on the same team. We're on the same page, and it's lovely. Yeah.
Great. That's great. So what has your journey been like, say, since those early days of coming to faith in Christ? And I know you guys came to SCBC somewhere around 2008, I'm thinking. Does that sound about right? And so I've known you guys since then. Kind of what was God doing to get you up to the place where he brought you here? And then you want to share a little bit about, since you've been here, because I've kind of known you guys since then, but just your walk with Christ. I think a lot of people assume that, it's just a perfect incline, I heard somebody say one time, I hear the term progressive sanctification. I'm not sure about that, but I know a lot about regressive sanctification. And I know the Christian life is more ups and downs than it is ups. But
sure.
So share with us a little bit about kind of what your walk with the Lord has been like in those years. What have you learned? What would you encourage, maybe some people just kind of starting out in the early days of their walk?
Good.
We stayed at that first church for about a year or so. And then there were some issues going on there. And so Andrew was going to go to Eagle's Nest for school. And so we thought, let's see what that church is like. Just so Andrew could meet some friends and maybe we can get involved there. And so we were at Eagle's Nest for a few years. I can't remember how long exactly. And I was did the children's ministry there. And so we grew in our faith for sure there. But then there were some disagreements as we were growing. When you have a better understanding of truth, then you want to move away from things that they're not in agreement with what the Bible says. And so a friend of ours that had been going to your church, I saw him out because he had gone to Eagle's Nest with me. It was Mike DiGiacomo's dad. And I saw him out at the store, and he's like, you need to come on over to this other church. It's really great. You remember, Dwayne, because you and I actually taught at Eagle's Nest at the same time. I taught preschool, right, and you were in the junior high, I think. And Jen was there at the same time too, and that's when Olivia was born, right around that time. Yeah. And so, but you had gone on to start your church. And we're like, okay. And we had gone through a really, really awful year because David's mom had leukemia and then passed away. And so it was really lonely for us. One of the things that we love about SCBC is it's such a church family. We didn't have that at the other place. And so going through a death and suffering and feeling like you're alone, that was really tough. And so we just felt like it was okay to move on. And in the meantime, like I can't remember if you were doing, but I was listening to, I had found a pastor online that did expositional preaching. It was a really great, I grew a lot in my faith, even though we were going through such a difficult time. But anyway, after David's mom passed, it was about a year after that. And so we went over to SCBC right around Christmas. It was like the Christmas service. And we walked in and we went to church, and it was like, it just felt like a relief. I don't even know. I can't even the kids, because the kids didn't want to go because they had friends over at the church, and we're like, no, let's see if this is a better fit. And we all walked away like it was like a balm going there on our souls. So we've been there ever since, and have been so thankful for the ministry there and for your faithfulness and the faithfulness of the elders and the deacons. It was that flows down into the families. Like your faithfulness inspires the people in the church, our church members, our church family. So it's something that we really have been so thankful for over the years. to have been blessed by your faithfulness to the Lord in your calling. Absolutely. So,
and I think, you were asking how does it really go, and how did it go for us? And I can say that, when you first get saved, you're kind of on fire for sure, and you're trying to suck in as much as you can. And then I think the reality sets in that you're still living in filthy rags, and you're never really going to be free of those things till you're in heaven with the Lord. So I think the reality sets in that you're still going to sin, and that's the struggle that you need to, you need to lay it down before the Lord every day. And so I think that's the reality that sets in after you're kind of on fire at first, after being a new Christian. And, that's, I guess that you can, looking at my professional career, what I do, you can liken it to the stock market, and in the end, you want to end up higher than where you were 10 years ago, but it's not a straight line. As you said, there's corrections along the way that occur. And I think that's what sharpens us. Those things are meant to happen. Those things are meant, to, cause 10 years down the road, you're relying on the Lord more than you did, 10 years before. And, those corrections along the way are what cause that to happen. Those are the things that happen to make sure that you're focused on the right thing. We look at a lot of the young families, and I know you wanted us to mention that, what advice would you give young families? And I would say always just focus on the Lord first. Just when you're making a decision with your children or your spouse, you've got to look towards the Lord first and say, what does he want me to do in this situation? And not make snap decisions or decisions that might be popular with the culture. It was, one example for us that was a hard decision was Andrew and going to college. And, that's a scary one, right? Because those are years in which a child becomes highly influenced by his or her peers, and in bad ways, sometimes very bad ways. And, we thought, oh, he's just got to go to a Christian college. That's just what has to happen. And the more we prayed about it, God opened doors and showed us things that, what, he'll be fine in a secular school, because I'm going to surround him with people that I've sent to protect him, and so it's pretty neat to see when you really leave the decisions up to the Lord and not just doing what you think is right or what's culturally acceptable, even within Christianity, right? So that would have been like culturally acceptable to say, you're going to a Christian college, within Christianity, but, we did more of a secular thing. And it ended up for Andrew actually being a real gift to him personally, that he was able to strengthen himself even more as a Christian, exposing himself to that. So I would say, make sure you're always making those decisions in life based on what you think God wants you to do, and not what you think is right based on being a Christian or what society thinks is right.
Something along those lines for me, I used to really stress when the kids were tiny, and I'm a little bit of a control freak about stuff. And so I would try to micromanage everything. And I just remember laying in my bed at night and just praying for them, and so worried that something would happen to them, or, help me with this, Lord. And I know there was a lady one time, and she said to me, you have to remember that those kids are not real. They're God's kids first. They're yours on loan. And that made such a change in my thinking in that, and with, my marriage and with being a mother, that they are the Lord's and they've been entrusted to me, and what a blessing and privilege that is. And so how can I glorify God in that, in that I don't have to control every single little thing they do, even though I fight against that still. But it's a comfort to me to realize that I love them so much, but the Lord loves them even more than I do. And he's working out what's best for them no matter what. So Andrew going to school there at Delaware, it was a bit of a stress because, I was worried about the influences that would be around him. But, the Lord used that as such a wonderful refining and testing for him. And it showed him his faith, and his faith is strong. And he made wonderful, godly friends. And that is a real blessing in his life and our lives to see God working, because I can't be at school there making decisions for him. And for Ellie, when she was just in New York City, I just have to trust God that he has a purpose and a plan for their lives, and they're faithful. And so he's going to work it out for their good and his glory. And that's a real comfort. It's, it's not a burden I have to take on myself. That's the Lord's burden. I just have to be faithful in the day to day. And, so that was a big thing.
That's a struggle. As Christian parents, we quickly fall into the trap. You see this in the Gospels with Jesus, that there's this assumption, I think, a lot of times, that our greatest enemy and greatest threat is outside of us rather than inside of us. And so as Christian parents, we can wall off the world and think that we've got it contained. But if we're not actually addressing the hearts of our children, then you're not really helping them. And so and of course, our kids are fairly similar in age. Olivia's a good bit younger, but we kind of came up in the pre-internet age, pre-Amazon. And I was talking to a parent a while back about that we didn't have a whole lot of we didn't have the glut of resources that are available today. And those resources, I think, are a blessing, but they can also be a curse, because you can now go on the internet and read 50 different opinions of how to raise your child. And I see that you probably see that too. In some of the young couples you talk to, they're stressed out because they don't know what's right, who to follow. This one says do this. This one says do that. This one says if you send your kid to secular university, you're going to ruin them. And then you hear a story like you shared, and you're kind of like, well, what do I believe? And I think that goes back again to, the voice we need to listen to is God's word, and filter every single resource and piece of advice or counsel through that, because he's the authority, and he speaks through his word. And so that, I think, that's the key. And it's good for us, I think, to remind, especially a lot of younger families, coming up in an age where there's a million different voices whispering in their ear, of that reality and that truth. So, and I know you guys have done that with your children, and it's been a blessing to watch. And I've had the privilege of being kind of a little part of that. I saw not long ago, saw the pictures of Ellie and Andrew's baptism, back years ago. They were so little. And it was pretty cool to see how God has worked in the life of your kids and your family. So, but we're going to kind of wrap it up here. And is there any last kind of thing you would say, hey, this is something that we would want to share, the way that God has blessed us, something we would encourage people to consider about their own walk with the Lord, about parenting, about marriage, any of that stuff that you think maybe you didn't get to say that you'd like to share?
I would say, for me, and at least as our relationship with one another, is don't put anything before your relationship with your spouse, other than the Lord. Because it's the one, we talked a lot about kids, and I didn't want people to get the impression that we were so focused on our kids. You want to be focused on them, but not so much as that you are with your spouse. Your kids are going to leave you, and hopefully you're going to be with your spouse for a very long time. So, that relationship is the one that, if you don't have that right, I think it hurts a lot of people with their kids, that they can't get the kid thing right because they're focusing too much on them and not each other.
Yeah. Very good.
And I think that for me, as a wife and a mother, my first ministry is my family. And it feels good to do things for other people, because you get praise, or, it feels good. Sometimes it's hard in the trenches at home, but that's your first ministry, your husband. Well, God is first, your husband, and then your children. And so that should be how the priority is. And then depending on the season of life that you're in, to be able then to minister to others. But when you're so outward focused, your family suffers. And God, that's what God's put right before you, if you're in that. And I think then one other thing is that something that the Lord showed me over the years as I've grown in my faith, that my salvation is not about me, it's about God and glorifying God. And so that's how we should live our lives in those roles as husbands, wives, daughters, friends. What are we doing to glorify God in those roles? Mm-hmm. And to represent the Lord well, and to show how good he is and his salvation, and point to God in whatever we do.
And stay engaged, mm-hmm. Because I think that if anything has caused the hardships along the line in my salvation has been the points in time when I disengage myself because I think I'm too busy doing other things that are more important. Mm-hmm. But it seems like when you're more engaged with your church body, you have to spend more time in the Word, and you're just where you're supposed to be, actually. Yeah. And when you're doing it, you actually feel better, and your life seemingly improves. I don't know that it does, but your relationship with the Lord certainly does. Mm-hmm. And then your worries kind of leave you behind. And it seems like that when you try to disengage to take care of your secular life, I guess, so to say, you're so busy with work or your kids or whatever, and you think, oh, I don't have time to do that. You think to yourself again, is that really the right thing to do? At some points it may be, but most of the time I would say it's probably not. And, Dwayne, you and I have gone through that over the time that we've known each other. Is, it's, from helping me and counseling me at times, that it's those times when I'm completely disengaged that I have my worst periods. So, that's what I would say, is stay engaged with your church family and step out of your comfort zone and do things that you might not normally do. Invite somebody over. Mm-hmm. That might be a big step for you, but have somebody over for dinner, or go help move somebody across town, or go do something that might be out of your comfort zone but engages you with the church community.
I think too, the more engaged you are in church, and the more that you are encouraging and being encouraged, that helps you with people outside of our church, like coworkers and things. It fills you up more. There's more to pour out.
Yeah, absolutely. And mm-hmm. I know, I remember, Dave, years ago, I don't know if you remember the content of your testimony, but the first time you and I ever went to Costa Rica, we went to Roca Viva, and you shared your testimony, and you made the point that, I have it on video, in fact, you made the point that, you thought being a man was providing a good life for your family.
Right.
How, God changed that perspective and helped you to see that actually that's not the most important thing.
Yeah.
And that always stuck in my head as a good reminder to remember, okay, look, there are a lot of good things I could be doing, but this is the most important one. It's the place that God has put me in. The church is important, don't get me wrong, but you have to be careful even in that respect of making ministry an idol.
Right.
And a lot of times I think providing for a family, sometimes I think a lot of times is more about making a name for yourself and being proud of what you're doing than really truly about the family. Even, there's a strong sense that we all have, I think, to want to make a name for ourselves, build a legacy on our own merit. And God, that's not what God's interested in. God wants us to live lives that glorify him. And that sometimes may mean that life from a human perspective doesn't appear to be as profitable or as meaningful or purposeful, but we know that it is. And that's a definitely an important thing to remember. So, and I appreciate you guys, you guys are, I would say kind of low key in the church life, but I as your pastor, I see and I'm aware of many things that you're doing, the people that you're investing in, and I'm thankful for for your faithfulness in that way. And I know a lot of people have and are being impacted by you guys and your family, and a lot of people don't even see it, but I know I see it on occasion, and I know the Lord sees it, and He's the one who's most important. So, but thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate this, and looking forward to what the Lord has in the years to come. Hopefully, many more years and of serving together and ministering together. So,
yeah, amen.
Right. Thanks again, guys.
All right,
Thank you, Dwayne.
let's see it. All right.